Great, everyone. Welcome to the Top Microservices Meetup, October 5th. We're going to be talking about UI controls, not like form elements kind of controls, but Casey will give the introduction to that. Before we get started, though, let's do the traditional say hi, where we work, anything else you want to say. Antoine, we'll start with you. I'll just go the order that I have in Zoom here, and then we'll go around the room, and we'll have time to thank our host as well. So Antoine, introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Antoine. I'm a software developer. I actually work on the same project as a bunch of people here. Casey, Ethan, Nick, Steven, Kelly. Yeah, that's it.
Cool. Kelly, your turn.
Hey, I'm Kelly. As Antoine said, I work on the same project as a good number of people on the project. Video
Right
off.
on. Nick.
Hey, yeah, my name's Nick. Yeah, we're all working on the same project together, using Eventide quite a bit and using some of the techniques that Casey's going to talk about today. So
Awesome. Sam.
Hey, yeah, I'm Sam. Working at a company called Hubadoo, which is based out of London, but I'm living in Bolivia, working remotely. And we've been using Eventide for about 2 years now. Worked a bit with Scott and Nathan on some of our projects, and hoping to open source a few libraries we've been working on for Eventide in the future. So hopefully that's coming. Yeah, that's me.
Done. Cool. Steven.
Yep. Hey guys, nice to meet everyone. I've been working with these folks on the substantial project. So yeah, that's it.
Cool. Welcome. Would Anna like to introduce yourself?
She wants to. I don't know if she has the captions on. I saw, but I don't know if she wants to introduce herself. My wife is watching, so
okay. Cool. Let's start.
Probably my kids too.
Nadeem, do you want to introduce yourself?
Nadeem Nazir, you guys probably remember me from LDT. Now I'm guest here.
Awesome.
Brian Sorge, working at LDT. We do a lot of stuff with Eventide still, and so it's always good to see what some of the cool techniques that other people are using. Excited to be here.
Cool.
Justin James, I'm also still at LDT, and I work with Brian.
Awesome. So yeah, we have a new location this time. So Michael, do you want to talk about Sales Rabbit or say anything?
Sure.
Yeah.
So my name is Mike Archibald. Everybody here calls me Archie. We have like 5 mics, and I do the short straw. So if you call me Archie, I'll totally respond to it. So I've been here at Sales Rabbit for 4.5 years, and I started my career in Ruby, which apparently you guys have worked in, and so. Yeah, as far as like Sales Rabbit goes, if you want to know about the company, we're a relatively spread out team. We have developers all across the world. We have some in Nigeria, and we have some in Amsterdam, Alaska, a couple in Brazil. So we're a pretty spread out company where we embrace remote pretty heavily. We're primarily Elixir. We are moving towards a service-oriented architecture using some of the tooling that Elixir provides, which is kind of neat. If you've ever done like a kind of a microservices approach in Elixir, it's got some great tooling for it. Aside from that, yeah, is there anything you guys want to know about Sales Rabbit?
Thanks for hosting us.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
1 second before we get to Casey. Okay, that person. Welcome, Lana or Lana, not sure how you say it. All right, let's transition to Casey. Let me introduce Casey. He enjoys learning and has been fascinated with computers ever since he let the magic smoke out of his family computer when he was 9. His journey has taken him from writing batch files to launching. His journey has taken him from writing batch files to launch Command and Conquer Red Alert, to doing e-commerce websites, security monitoring software, and autonomous components to facilitate document drafting and signing. When he's not in front of his computer, you can find him in front of his computer playing.
Yeah, that's the joke.
Okay. Okay, when he's not in front of his computer, you can find him in front of his computer playing Minecraft or being the world's okayest dad to 4 beautiful daughters. And with that, we'll hand it over to Casey.
Okay. My dry sense of humor. Let's see. So I get my I love the Zoom controls. Okay. All right. Away. Okay, so hopefully this goes well. I'm here to talk about a concept that we call UI controls. It's going to build off of what Antoine talked about last time, and we'll kind of review that a little bit. And really, I'm not going to tell you everything about all of them. It's really going to be an introduction to UI controls. And my goal really is to just kind of show you what they are, what I've seen, give you a taste of it so that hopefully you really want to go try and explore it later yourself. And so when I was thinking last night of like, why should anyone even care about me? This is just a little bit about me, so you know, like, you know, I've been around a little bit, you know, I've seen some things, done some things, seen a lot of bad implementations of things. So yeah, just, you know, I'm not a complete nutter noob. And this is our rough agenda that we're gonna go through here. So yeah, we're gonna talk about why you might care, review what Antoine talked about a little bit. Gonna talk a little bit about UI controls, just like at a high level, and then we're just gonna jump straight in and show you the demo, and then come back and have some finishing thoughts. So why do we really care? And really, I was thinking about it as like, we only really care if we want to be able to easily validate our assumptions about the UI and our software that we're dealing with, right? Like with a high degree of confidence here. So it's kind of like that's one of the reasons why we have a test suite, right? Is so that we can quickly verify things. This is another aspect or another dimension or flavor of that, where we want to be able to just quickly get onto our site and control it and then verify a certain aspect of it. And so without these controls, you would be left to try and control it in some other way, right? Which is not as desirable. Okay, so a quick review from last time, and forgive me, Antoine, if I butcher this. What we're trying to practice here is we're trying to do engineering, or the application of science, or the application of the scientific method to our process of developing software, right? And if you remember last time, we had this scientific method here, right? And as we're going around this, we're applying this to what we do, right? As we're developing something, we have a hypothesis that what we did actually solves the problem, actually does the functionality that we want it to do, without any bugs or defects in it, right? And so we need a way of validating that hypothesis, right? And we do that with an experiment. And when you test with an experiment, you control some things, feed in some input, and then expect the things, to have a certain output based on the things that you controlled. Right? So that's how we're applying this scientific method to our software development. Oops. Apparently the scroll bar goes back and forth. Good to know. So with software controls, we use the software to control different variables so that we can predictably experiment on our software, right? And an important concept that we talked about last time is that you control at the level of observation. So if our level of observation is the UI, we shouldn't have to go to the database and type in some stuff to get it and then go back to the UI, right? We want to keep at that same level and control it there and observe it there, right? Which is what I just said.
So can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, if you have some questions.
So we were talking in the car about spinning up a database for development purposes or for testing. And I asked if it was populated with control data. But this answer, what you're saying, this principle seems to suggest you need to have control data at each level. Is that right?
You have controls at each level.
Controls, yes, that's what I mean. You have controls at each level. So the database controls, if a database was to populate with data when you spun it up, it wouldn't necessarily come from the controls in your code base of your components, for example. That wouldn't be appropriate according to this rule. Is that correct? Just like you're saying you'd have controls for your UI.
I fully understand the question.
Let me take a crack at it.
Yes, please.
Spoiler alert, Casey's going to put data into the database. So the idea isn't that if you're experimenting at the UI level, that you can't have data in the database, but you wouldn't have to go to the database to put the data in it. You as a person, you would do that if you were observing at the level of the database. You might go in there and suppose you wanted to prove that you had, I don't know, set up 4 key relations correctly. Maybe you might go to the database and experiment to do that. And so you control it at the level of the database. But now when you're working on your application and you're observing at the level of your UI, you need to get data into the database in certain states to be able to do that. Why would you make someone go to the database to do that, to spin up the database? Why would you make someone spin up the code in the project to do that?
So like with our event type based components, the controls are there in the repo with the code.
Right, because you're controlling and observing at the level of code,
Right.
with those when you run your tests and stuff.
So you do the same at the database level and you do the same at the UI level, or is there nothing at the database level?
I've never done it there, but your question was about databases, so.
But the principle,
yeah.
but the principle is you put your controls at the level of your observation. And that's why we have controls in our component. You would have controls in your UI repository.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to go somewhere else to control the thing you're observing, right? And we'll get to it, but like your UI controls may use a lower concept like a programmatic control to do what it's trying to do. And the implementation, it doesn't matter, right? But like they can use each other to accomplish their goals, right? Yeah, like they're not like.
But you as a person shouldn't have to go and fiddle with
Right.
all that.
Yeah, as a person, I shouldn't have to like, hey, software developer, please go and interact with the database so that I can now interact with your software in a particular way.
That introduces a lot of friction. And the title that Casey didn't ask me to put on his presentation that I used was frictionless state control.
That's good. That's good. I just didn't think of it. So. Okay, yeah, and I wanted to specifically call this out that like I've done web development a lot through everything I've done. And so when I talk about UI controls, I'm going to be focusing on web. It doesn't mean it's the only thing, right? This applies anywhere, anything, any concept. But today we're going to mostly just focus on the web, right? So the same general concepts apply to a phone, native app, or whatever, right? Anything applies. It's just we're going to focus on the web. So.
Okay, so do you think it'd be worth calling out one more time? When we say UI controls, we don't mean buttons and scroll bars and.
Yeah, I guess that's true. You'll see in the demo what I really mean, so hopefully that'll provide clarity. But yeah, this is not a widget talk. We're not talking about UI widgets or anything of the sorts. We're talking about something that's different, and hopefully that will become apparent.
Scientific controls.
Yes. So what composes this UI control? It's the same technique, same concept, same programming, whatever that you use to make your regular web stuff is what composes web controls, right? They have a different purpose, but it's still just the same stuff, right? You already know how to do it. For web requests and stuff, we're going to favor GET requests. There's a couple different reasons that I've discovered. I probably don't know all of them, but GET requests are pretty easy to use. All you do is put everything in the browser bar and off it goes, right? You don't have to set up a form and post it or any of that other stuff. And certain things are then bookmarkable, right? If you really wanted to bookmark some sort of control that you're doing, it's easy to do, right? It's just part of the bookmark. As opposed to some of the complexity that comes in place when you have some things that are post or pat, all those other stuff, right? So if you focus on a GET request, it provides a much more fluid, easy use and interaction with your controls. Yeah, I put this in specifically, you still have to think about them. They're not just, oh yeah, throw everything out the window and do whatever I want, right? You're still a programmer, you're still programming, you still worry about coupling and cohesion. And as I was doing the demo site, I spent way too long playing with those concepts and doing different things and it probably won't show, but it was a lot of fun for me anyway. Yeah, and keep it as simple as small as possible, but no simpler or smaller, right? You don't need to be crazy controls necessarily that you click one button and configures half your site or something like that, right? You keep them simple, small, and then people can use them as they need to. Yeah, and this is not necessarily intended just to be a way to expose your database, right? If you really want to do that, there are tools out there that let you do that pretty easily. The intention behind this is to actually think about what kind of experiments, concepts, things need to be happening with your website, your UI, and having controls to control them so that you can do your experiments effectively. And you probably don't want to put these in production because, well, hopefully that's obvious. Let's put it that way. I won't go into horror stories of things that should not have been in production that ended up being used. Okay. All right. So now you have to bear with my lovely demo here. So is this visibly easy? I don't know.
It's big enough.
I thought it was all right, but no. Okay. So I threw together this concept. I was going to do much more than I actually got done, so unfortunately it's not as great as I want. But this is the message store bank. It's your money eventually, right?
Eventual consistency joke.
And so I want to talk about like, also I would forgive me, I really didn't, I just like downloaded some themes and threw them in there and hacked it all together. So I don't know if this is advanced, but a lot of times when like I've started a company or whatever, you usually have like special logins, right? You're like, oh, I need to go log in as the some user so that I can get access to this feature. Oh darn, that's not the one that I wanted. I actually need to log in as, you know, some other user, because that's the one that has, you know, the enabled features or things that I want, or some flavor of that, right? Like, oh, this is how I control getting access to my website is by having special usernames and passwords. Hey, right? What if you didn't have to do that, right? What if you could come into controls and just create a user and then sign in as them and then, you know, give them the feature that you need to give them. And now you can go look at it and see that it does what you want it to do. Ta-da!
Yes, now it's very clear what happened.
Exactly. Now, what if instead of, you know, like having to create a specific user, what if you actually didn't have to be logged in to see it at all, right? Like, what if I just signed out, you know, so I'm not, oh, I think that's hard coded actually. But like, I'm not signed in anymore, but I can still see this page. What's up with that? Well, as you might have noticed, I have a control here that allows me to control access to the site. I can just turn it off because what I'm trying to control and what I'm trying to deal with, I don't care about access control at the moment. Like, I just need to make sure that the account shows the balance correctly, and that's all that I really care about, right? So I can turn it off, or, you know, I can enable it for this browser session. And then when I go to visit a particular account, if I don't have permissions, it logs, you know, yeah, well, I wasn't logged in, so it kicked me back to the login page, right? So I can turn things on and turn them off and control what I care about. In fact, the users that I used at the beginning to like type something, I just created those with controls, right? When I was prepping for this talk, I was like, oh, I should probably have a couple of users to show. Oh yeah, easy peasy. I just come in here and create. And like, you can see it a little bit how they are, but like I can come up here. Oops, I just click copy. Guess why wouldn't I? You can come up here and say, you know, an email equals, you know, yeah, sure, that one, right? And boom, I just created another user, particular user with this password with that, so I can use it in whatever way I want, right? And I can come on and say, no, I don't need that user anymore. I'm just gonna delete it, right? And in this way, the data and stuff that we're using is a lot less like a pet. You're like, oh, my precious little pet, I can't get rid of you. And more like something we don't care about. If it goes away, it goes away, right? So people say, you know, like cattle, right, or whatever. You know, they're just a means to an end. So yeah, you can come in and just do what you need to do, right? And all right, let me see. Oops, I didn't mean that. I meant this. Let's see. Oh yeah. Yep. Okay. Talked about that. Is there any questions or thoughts, or like, does that not blow your mind? Honestly, like, I know it's pretty simple because I didn't get like crazy complicated features and stuff implemented, but like, for those of us who've done UIs and stuff, this is like amazing, right? You just get it to where you want it and then go test what you need to test. And like I didn't get there, and maybe I'll have a follow-up presentation in 100 years where I show, like, maybe we integrate this with the account component, and maybe I need to control writing a message to see how it comes through and comes back. Great, have a write message control or something. Or maybe I don't, and I'm just going to exercise the view data, and I just control the view data and don't even care about the components. Right? And you could take those controls from the components and bring them in and use them as necessary in your web, in your UI. And you don't have to go log into a component and say, hey, please do a message for me or something.
Are you gonna show us some of the covers a little bit, or would that be a bad?
Yes.
Come on.
No. Yes, that I fully intended to actually write one of these terrible, awfully complex controls so that you can get a peek behind the covers. Is how we do it. But is there any other thoughts, concerns, questions before we do that?
Anyone online have any questions or comments?
I don't know if it's appropriate, but it could be interesting to look at the implementation if it's ready for presentation. If not, then it's fine.
We will take a peek at it, but I will hedge it as it's just the musings of someone who's learning and not necessarily something you want to consider exemplar and use in all your projects, but it gives you an idea, right? So
When you sign up for Meetup and you make the group, they ask you to give a noun that will refer to all of the people who interact with your Meetup. Ours is learners, because may we forever be learners.
So anyway, I just wanted to make sure it's clear the state of the code anyway, written in random hours when it had available. So okay, so what we want to do, what we're going to do is we're going to create a toggle here. So right now we have no means of controlling this admin thing. Whatever it is, I honestly just threw it in there so I have something to control. But there's actually one page where it matters, but and so we want to be able to control that, right? Right now, I'd have to go off into the database and flip a bit, but we don't want to have to do that. We want to control at the level we're observing. So, in my glorious environment here, you can see I have a bunch of routes, and again, these probably should not be deployed in production, but these ones are not guarded against such. And let's see here. I don't know how familiar everybody is with. Is it visible? Right, I tried to make it.
Yeah.
Okay. These are just groups of different endpoints. These are all. Notice they're all gets because. Right, I don't need it, like, makes it easy. And, you know, I've kind of grouped them by like access control stuff and like account things or user things, right? And let's go down to the user and we'll set this to, I called it set admin, so we'll just, spoiler alert, I did this to make sure I didn't look too foolish. Oh, whoops, that's not gonna work. So pair of programming here, if you guys want to stop me if I make a mistake or whatever, but at the risk of doing too much at once, I will just pop in the remove admin as well. All right. Okay, so we have our route set up. We now have to give them a controller, like go to the controller and add the methods into there. So we come here, I have, you know, notice that I've kind of sectioned off our controllers into their own thing. So this This folder has our actual like controllers and things like that. Whereas outside of that is our application controllers and other things. Oops. Yeah. Okay, so you can see it's pretty simple here. We have our listing of users, our control to create a user. You can see the different parameters that you can pass in if you want to. These all get passed into a programmatic control, and it just kind of does what it needs to because that's all that matters, right? In this case, if you want to set a password, you can also create a credential. I have them separate. And I'm gonna show delete, and I'm just gonna come down here and do like a set admin. And we need to get the parameters from it here. And then I have created conveniently some programmatic controls, right? And down here, no, that's not it. Oh, you know what? I actually had it just in the model for better or worse, because in theory, you would want to be able to set somebody as an admin in your website or not. So we're just gonna actually use that. And so I say, a model user set admin and pass the ID. And then we're going to redirect to the show so that you go back and see the user. Because this is just going to be on a specific user's page, not on the index.
So you're relying upon the actual code structures for setting an admin to create the control. Is that what you just said? You rely on the model. You're talking about.
I'm relying on something that's applicative, that's part of the operational code, not just a control. Because I mean, and it's whatever gets the job done. So if that doesn't work, then you might have your own programmatic control, or
So sometimes you could.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'd have to work around that.
yeah, and like right here for the delete all one, I just go straight to the active records. They can delete everything. Whether or not that's the greatest, I don't know. This one is a control that's meant to create a user because it's very specific. Things like that. So we have those set up. Oh, we need to add it in somewhere, of course, right? So let's go to our controls here and let's pop this open. And oh yeah, side note that like I have a segment of this view that I've put out into another thing. We don't even really worry about that. I'm just gonna pop it up here. And I'll say if the user is an admin, it's just like a boolean that I have on there. And I'm gonna put a link to, so if there are an admin, we'll give them the ability to remove it. So remove admin. And the path there is controls user remove. Oops. Remove admin path, and it takes the user ID. Otherwise, we're going to have the ability to set that as an admin. Yeah, and yeah.
Casey, on your line 5 there, is that supposed to have a question mark at the end of it?
Oh, it probably should have a predicate, but it does not.
Okay, that's
so if we refresh, I'll now have this thing that I can click to set the admin and remove the admin. Yay!
So it is really yay. It really is. Super cool.
Yeah, because like what would you have to do if you couldn't click it? What options would you?
I'm not a professional web programmer. That is not part of my skill set right now, although I'm doing things to expand into that. But I would have gone into a database and created these dummy accounts by writing some SQL and saving the scripts so that it can do and undo this, not at the level. What's the expression that he was using? Control at the level of observation. I would not have done it. And this is way, way better.
Other ways I've done it before is like in another browser, log in as one of the special users who would have the ability to make someone an admin or not. But again, that's friction. That's right, other browser. What's that special user?
It's a slogan. In fact, I have worked places where production systems have accounts like this that are left over from people doing things to set up and test. Production is obviously the wrong place to be doing that, but occasionally that happens in organizations.
Yeah. And so like now this person's an admin, we have access control, actually control to be on, and they can see it, like it works. So
how do you separate your code base so that when it goes out the pipeline, that you don't end up deploying this?
So you probably would actually end up deploying them. Whether or not they're available and usable is another story, right? So you could surround it.
Your routes, but
Yeah.
And make those routes stable to production, right?
Yeah. So if
it's just a Ruby file.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can just surround that with the if should controls or if controls question mark, whatever, however you want to do that. Then go ahead and do it.
Got it. So you leave it all in place all the time.
Yeah, and then they just won't be accessible because Ruby says no.
Okay.
So I don't I don't want to claim this is the most exemplar perfect way to do it, but it at least gives you an idea of what's possible and kind of a direction, right, of how to go.
So you get to work with tutors who are guiding you through this learning journey. Are there places we can go to achieve that learning?
Well, you're spoiling some of my stuff later on.
Sorry.
No, just kidding. No, later on I was gonna say, if you have questions or about the UI controls, you could ask them in the event type Slack. There's a lot of us that have some, various levels of experience with them there. And later, I was gonna say, please at me, because I really wanna learn these really well. And so if you have questions as you're going along and you ask the event type Slack, maybe it's not for development or wherever fits. If you ask me, I'd like an opportunity to give an answer. And then we can let those who might have more experience answer if I don't adequately do so. That way I get to learn as well. So, but that I will reiterate that later on, but that's what I was gonna say.
But still, I still have the question. I mean, that partially answers it. There's one resource, but if I go and Google UI controls, I'm going to find widgets and buttons.
Yes.
Do you know of an online tutorial? I mean, this was fantastic.
I'm unaware of any.
This will likely be the first one.
We're leading edge here.
Yes. Yeah, and my intention is to have people who have more experience than me kind of review this code, and we'll put it up on like a GitHub or something.
Oh, great.
So you can laugh at it. No, I'm just kidding. So you get an idea of what I did, and we can, poke at it, make it better, and hopefully make it into an exemplar that people could reference. That'll all happen over time, I suppose. But yeah, great. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns? Okay, I did have one other, somewhat, it doesn't seem related, but I think it is. And that is, we also can go control things in other places, ways, whatever, right? We can control our style, right? Like our CSS and how we do things. For example, we could have a page that has, and this is totally just garbage made up, but I wanted to try and illustrate it. Like we have a page where we have all of our actual widgets, our web like pieces on the page, and we bring our style sheet in and we see how it influences those pages, those different widgets and how they are. So I can actually experiment with my CSS, my styling, and have the controlled HTML easily accessible and available to see what the results are and verify them visually, easily. Right, so it's not all just, because part of what I mean is like, you know, the access control thing, that wasn't a database thing. That's not just accessing a database, at least the way I did it. But this also is just not just a database thing. This is having control over your styling and or having control over your markup so that you can experiment with your styling, right?
It's a universal principle.
Yes.
It applies
So
everywhere.
you find ways to control the part, like the markup, so that you can experiment and verify the styling, right? Or assets or whatever, right? Like you find ways to do that, right? And this is a horrible example, but and you might have more than one page, right? You might have one page that represents all the generic widgety widgets, and another page that maybe is more specialized, but you can still use that, or
More structure to it.
you know, maybe one that's specialized into like a modal dialogue that pops up, so you can verify that works correctly, whatever, right? Like, just make sure you have the means of staying in control of your UI, so that you can then run your experiments and verify in an easy way, all at the level of observation, right? So just throwing that out there. And if you think of other cool ways to control things, please share them with everyone. Like, I love learning about this stuff. So.
For the benefit of folks who weren't here last time, would you be willing to show the control code? Not just the UI control, but the UI control is called into some controls.
My code?
Yeah.
Oh, sure, yes. So I had just control code down here. Like for example, the user here. I can pop that out so you're not disturbing it. So one important concept in the Eventide Slack. So I don't know a lot about Rails. Let's back up. I don't know tons about Rails, right? Still, this is why it was a lot of learning for me. And like I learned, oh wow, Rails has a magic thing for this and that. Oh great, okay. When there was a conversation, and I wish I'd like snipped it or something, but where Scott Bellware recommended you separate like your data from your actual model of how things work, and you don't even put it in the Rails models directory. You put in a data directory inside lib, and so or like separate out. And so that's what I tried to do. So my actual active record models are here, and there's like nothing. Oh, thanks. There's like nothing to them, right? I don't really have anything. You could argue I probably should have a little bit more in there, maybe some associations, maybe, but they're pretty rare. And then the model itself has like things that you might want to do with that data, like get a list of them or get a list of admins or get a user by email or something like that, right? And that's where the actual the interaction with the data objects that the actual models are. Also in the controls, that's where I was creating the active record model here, right? So in this case, like for an example, that is I'm not storing that in the database. I just want an example of what one of these things is. And I have like realistic, I guess, data controls. And then down here, I have a create control, and that's one I want to actually persist to the database. I forgot. I actually created a UI test. So you can see that you can use, if you need to automate your experiments with the UI, you can use the controls in that automation just as much as you can manually. I will show that to you here in a moment. But you can see here when I'm creating something in a database, I want to actually have database code. You know, I want my email to be somewhat unique, and I want my ID to be unique. I'm using a SQLite, and I didn't want to bother to figure out how to use UIDs with it, and maybe I should just try and use Postgres instead. But so I just use random integers for now. This is why I was like, this is an exemplar. I really would like to improve it, but regardless, I just say, hey, give me a random user ID, and boom, I stick it and save it, right? And so that's what the UI was using, is this, so this is like the interact with the database control, and then this is just give me an example for not the data, like doesn't have to be persistent per se. And so then you can see how it kind of goes and uses like the level other observation levels to fulfill what it needs to do.
There's composition.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So that's running. So I also created this. Yeah. So the tests probably don't matter too much, but there's a couple of different tests in here that verify access to an account or not, and or that an account shows. They're not very great. I didn't do a lot of testing when I was doing this. I was mostly doing actual interacting and playing and stuff. That's another thing that needs to be improved. But as you exercise it, you can see that it pulls up the control page, creates a user, creates an account, creates a user, turns on access control, verifies that it rejects them. And so like you can use these controls, and it's pretty easy because they're just gets, right? So I just say, hey, this thing with these parameters, off it goes.
That's actually, like, if you think about from, like, your company uses a QA team or whatever, and they wanna test or somebody, and this is actually really powerful for a QA team.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and where we work, we kind of do all of that. We do all of that, but so that's what enables it. Gives you a lot of power, right? Like I need to set up a certain scenario. Oh yeah, I can just call this UI control, boom, boom, boom. Great, that's how I need it. Now I'm gonna call the applicative code, the operative code, and verify that, you know, what happens. I get redirected to the right page, I get right. So
another use for it is the business folks, when they need to do a demo, they've got complete control of the system. They don't have to be like, hey, developers, can you put it in this state for me? And then nobody touch it because it's so hard to get it back into that state.
And that's a great example for wanting to bookmark them. And if it gets, you just, that demo team, you can just have a list of bookmarks, and just go down the list and say, wait, this.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see how it enables people, like, no offense to our wonderful team out there, but some of them don't have a lot of pragmatic skills, right? They're not going to want to go into the database and say, yeah, let me put this in the state I want, but they can go click a link, right? That's pretty easy, right? So, and even with a little bit more training or whatever, you can get them to put a parameter in the URL if they need to or something like that, right? So there's a lot of power in that. Any other thoughts, questions? I don't have much more.
This is extrapolate in your mind when you have like the work you guys do, you have these complicated workflows, right? What if you could just like click, put any of them into any state, just with a few clicks? It takes some time to think about the controls and write them. But once you have them, like they pay dividends.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, I know you do. We'll just say it generically, like hardware configuration, right? Imagine if you could just say, yeah, I want hardware and I want to add this to it and I want to add that to it. And oh yeah, I want to set this one's status to down.
Yeah.
Done. Now I can test that things work. Like I've controlled that. I can now verify that it shows it's down, it does whatever, right? You can see that's pretty powerful. Okay, I just want to throw this out there. Like a test suite, like pragmatic controls and things like that, they're not free, right? They are code that you have to maintain, but they are so worth it. Okay, right? You still have to think about it. You still have to have them as part of your, like what you're doing on your mind. If you're going to change a feature, that may mean you have to change some aspects of certain controls. So, but they're so worth it. The enabled power that you have is awesome. So just keep them as simple as you can, right? But no simpler, right? So that you're changing things that are cohesive, the controls are all cohesive for the thing that you're changing, etc. Here's where I was gonna mention this. If you have any questions about this afterwards or whatever, again, you can go to the Eventide Slack or whatever. If you do, please add me, so I have an opportunity to do my best to answer said question. And then if I can't, we'll rely on others with more expertise. So with that, is there any other questions here now?
Anyone online too, if you have any questions or comments?
When, in the development process, when do you start thinking about these?
When do you start thinking about controls?
Yeah.
Is
Is it after the fact, when the feature is done, then you go back and say, what
I would
be?
say no, like, because you're thinking of pragmatic controls as you're, like, oftentimes I will create a pragmatic control before I create the actual code, because I'll use it in the test or experiments as I'm going. So like the test first approach, the TED style.
Right.
And that also applies with the UI stuff. Sometimes I do end up writing them a little after, but you'll want to have the means to control it so that you can write your experiment or test and then get the result. And then you can write the actual operative code to fulfill it.
Similar as test-driven development practice.
One of the ideas underpinning controls, like at first blush, it looks like what a lot of the world would call a fixture, a test fixture. But the controls, they're things of development. It's, as the developer, I am providing examples of what these constructs look like. I'm not relegating that to a tester. So things that change together, stay together, they're a thing of development. I work on that as I'm developing the thing in question.
So another way to find the answer to your question, I love that this is very, very old, but you're making it new. Like you're bringing a very old principle, the scientific method, and you're bringing it to software development. Well, as a scientist, if you're going to run an experiment, you set up your control first, and then you set up your experimental case and compare it to. Like you've got your control case set up from the beginning as you're going around that loop of the scientific method. So, yeah.
I can just say I've been on the team Ron for like a year or so, and I use them every day, all the time. I'm like, oh, you know what? I need to see what this does in this context. I can't remember, or like I just want to make sure I have my understanding correct. Oh yeah, that's what I thought. Done. Like it's so nice.
So putting the management hat on, how much extra time the developer will spend on this?
Are you talking like because there's a very narrow immediate time, and then there's the time savings over the long run, right? And so yeah, you will spend time writing. Again, you're going to keep them simple though, right? You don't want crazy complex controls usually, right? If you can avoid them, and so it does add some time to it, but in the long run, your ability to confirm your experiment, you save so much time. It's so nice.
Can you make that as a part of like a
From a management
acceptance criteria type thing? Maybe.
From a management perspective, what are your people doing right now? They are doing things to get the system in a state that lets them build and observe.
Right.
And it's not this.
Right, so they have to keep doing the manual setup over and over again.
Right.
They
Definitely there's a
forget how-
value in it, but I'm trying to think of how do you processize it so it's always done? And how do you quantify it so the business know the cost of
I think
this and
So
say,
once you let
from my perspective, it's just a part of the work. You're just
okay,
expected to
so
do it as
just
part of the
make
work.
it part of the
When you
work.
say, I need someone to be able to log into my website, part of the work is that it is controlled.
Because we have
That's
the
my perspective.
responsibility to ship code that we know works. And this tool enables us to do that. Like surgeons, they're probably not sanitizing their instruments themselves, but someone on the medical staff does that.
Yeah.
They don't bill separately for that. That's just expected. You do this.
Right.
Yeah.
So it has to be part of the engineering discipline when you're coding that you are.
This is the thing about engineering discipline, like management, they may want to impose onto people to follow all these procedures. But as an engineer, as a developer, if you want to call me. I did not even know what test-driven development was several years ago. And I heard about it and I'm like, oh, another thing to do. And I sat down with the team and I learned to do it. And it's like, oh, this is a tool that I have been missing that makes my life better. And I think this is one of those. Not something that you have to enforce once somebody has tried it and tasted it. And I've only just observed, I haven't tried it. But clearly I can see that once, if I was developing web code, I would want to use controls. If I was developing style, I would want to use controls. I am developing event type components in Ruby, and we always use controls. And I wouldn't ever dream now of not. And so now I see that it's a universal principle. It's like, no, you're not going to stop me from writing my controls. Like, I'm going to save time. I want my life to be happy as a developer. So I don't know how you get all people to make the initial effort to taste something and then to be craving it all the time. How do you get people to take that first drink? I don't know. I wish more people just would.
Yeah, if I could add something here.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, we first started using controls when we were looking at we were writing our event type components, and we were just naturally copying how controls were used in the event type components, and then we started adding them to our Rails application. And initially it was it was just a lot of additional things we were adding, controls for this, controls for that, and there didn't seem to be any immediate benefit when we were migrating an existing application to use controls. But about 2 or 3 months in, there was suddenly a tipping point where suddenly all sorts of other things suddenly just started getting much easier and much faster. Like we were like, oh, I've got a form object that's used for validation. It turns out I need to use it to a hash, and then suddenly you can experiment with it really easily at a Rails console, because you can just say, oh, give me a populated form object, because you have the control. When you experiment with it, when you write the test and you need to serialize it to the hash, and suddenly that information already existed. Or when we were suddenly needing to say, oh, we need to load some realistic data into an application, or seed it with some data. And suddenly, oh, we've got some controls, we can repurpose them for that. And it was kind of interesting. It was migrating an existing application to controls. It was like, it just seemed like a lot of work and a bit of sort of drudgery for the first couple of months. And I confess, I was like, is this really the way to go? I've been told it's the way to go, so I'm going to keep persevering with this, but I've got doubts. And then they just suddenly hit a tipping point, and suddenly everything got much faster, and suddenly loads of things we were doing were just so much easier because the controls existed.
Awesome.
Just a personal experience with how we found it. So if anyone else was going to like dive into this, I would expect that you would probably find the same thing to happen initially that you would find the first month or two. It does just seem like something additional to do, but it does suddenly cause a lot of benefits past a certain point. Not to say that we've got UI controls yet, but I'm talking about controls for regular Ruby objects and database objects, things like that.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
I could probably add a thing or two if you guys can hear me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess right when the first question was asked about when, I'd already kind of had my little virtual hand up to kind of chime in on my own experiences.
Sorry.
That's all right. You know, and I think somebody else kind of chimed in around, drawing the parallels with test-driven development. And I think that's really a key piece here, is that if you see these as an after fact of your work, then you're really losing a significant portion of the value. And so, Sam was talking about migrating the existing app, and I can certainly see how that draws the timelines on getting, kind of getting reward for your work. But if you're operating from a modality of doing that test-driven development work, where you're writing that test first before it's failing, and all that kind of thing, and you bring controls or examples, generators, whatever it is that you do, right into the forefront of that process, what happens is you start getting some of those wins right away, right? You start getting the wins while you're churning on the work that you're doing. And so, if you ask me, it's trying to find a way to actually bring it early into your development process rather than seeing this as an after the fact artifact that you're now also required to put together, because you just get those compounding wins right during the development process. And that's what you want. You want the compounding wins. That's why you write those tests, because the time where you're getting probably the most value is while you're actually writing that code, because you're iterating on it so much faster. And so controls give you that. And the other piece that I'll kind of tack on top of that is, as you go and build the next components in your system, I don't mean event type components, I just mean the next class, the next module, whatever you want to call it, that's like one layer higher in your hierarchy of types or the way your system's structured. Suddenly you're just leveraging the controls from the layer beneath, and then things just compound, because every layer that you go up, you just have a buffet of tools at your ready, right? And so for me, it's that same logic that I use to try and reason with people about why you do test-driven development, because you just go faster. It feels slow because you got to learn it, but at the end of the day, I do it because I move faster, and you retain control, you move faster. And so anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now, but controls in JavaScript, Python, C#, you can do it all over the place. So it's a way of being.
That's one thing I was gonna comically call out, is like, when I was interacting with these controls over here, like nowhere here does it say, oh, this is only available in Ruby, right? This is literally generic web stuff, right? Anything that can do web, ta-da, you can do controls, right? Like you can, anything that can do a UI, right? You can do these kinds of controls, right? So I appreciate your comment. That's great. Yeah,
to add on to what's been said, I think that I don't know how you can prove your changes without having control. I think it's the point of the scientific method. Like, we have hypotheses about our implementation, and we need to prove that it works, basically. And I don't know how we do that without control. So we wanna have control, because we have our controlled variables in our experiment, and we want to get as much as we can out of the way so that we can get to the essence of what we're trying to prove. So I think from the perspective of a UI, if you take an example, which is, I want to prove that I can place an order when I'm user and I have an account. You don't want the stuff that's, oh, I need to create an account, I need to create credentials, all that to be in your way. Like if you make changes to placing an order, you want to get as fast as you can at the UI level. You want to get to, I want to actuate the code that I change under the hood. That's for placing the order. And so, yeah, I think you have to have the controls as you're proving your software. It cannot be something that you figure out after, because it's part of proving your changes, what you're implementing. So it has to be implemented as you go in order to prove your implementation, in order to conduct experiments.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I will add, kind of like how test-driven development, when you're trying to set up an experiment, your test to validate that something works, right? That is a signal on your design. That is a signal for what you're trying to do. And if it's too complicated or things like that, like that controls also give you another signal. Like if something is really hard to control, why, right? Like why, what is it? Is it just the nature of what it is, or are you making it hard to control, right? So something also to consider. You want to mention something?
Yeah, so I was just thinking, so like I've got my manager's cap on, and I was just
Get it off.
I was just thinking through like how no, it's like it should be a good thing, right? It's like one of the things that's a big concern for me a lot of times is like how much time are my engineers spending solving problems versus dealing with like configuration of things that kind of get in the way, right?
Sure.
So when you show me this, like I'm really excited because I'm like, okay, developer ergonomics is actually one of those like non-functional requirements we care about in our software. This solves for some of that, right? It's like this is like a huge win in terms of productivity for our engineers, which means that they're going to spend less time jumping into a database, punching in numbers, or anything like that, and they're going to spend more time thinking, okay, the customer's running into this problem. How do I solve it? Right, and that's where I want them to spend their effort. So if we have to give up a little bit of time to put in a system like this, I like from my perspective, one, I'm gonna have happy developers. Happy developers are gonna be like really excited to deal with some of the shenanigans that customers do, right? And so like, that's a huge win for me. And then all the other like kind of secondary benefits from this is you just got you've got my head spinning and so I'm thinking about how to implement this in our organization.
That was the whole point of this, is to get you going, get you thinking about it. So great.
So like I think this is actually really powerful, and I think to that point of like how do you get people to try it out? I know for a fact I'm going to take this to my engineers and they're like, what?
Unfortunately, that is the state.
And what we're going to do is we're going to do a little practice. I'm like, we're going to spend some time pair programming today. We're going to go through and build some of these out together, right? And I'm just going to show you like the benefits. And I think if I get a couple of engineers really excited about it,
it'll spread.
It'll spread.
That means you have a pretty healthy engineering culture. That's what happens.
We'll see if it spreads. So
to aid you in that, we do put the recordings up usually within a day or two. So
okay, perfect. Exciting.
Do you do pair programming for learning exercises, or are you doing pair programming all the time?
All the time. We actually have a mandatory 65% programming or pair programming time. And then, but we limit it to 65% because some people burn out with pair programming, but it is. So I'm heavily influenced. I worked at Mavenlane for a while. They're like kind of a pivotal culture, pivotal labs kind of culture. So pair programming, they can love that.
I'm a huge.
I love it.
Pairing ensemble of any kind. It reduces waste.
Just give me that quick feedback.
Can I ask a question about your pair programming? When you pair program, do you have a like a sort of a pull request review process afterwards, or do you assume that review has happened naturally with another engineer as a result of the pair programming?
We do still do a review process, although it's not so like that. We change it, right? Because like in a typical scenario, you do like the code review, and it's like to test and look for bugs. We look at like my opinion. This is a hot take.
I love it.
Code reviews are really terrible at catching bugs. Like, yes, thank you. Here, please. We can look at study after study. It's just like,
I like you.
So like pair programming, hopefully the pairs caught most of the bugs. Any of the testing that we've done has caught most of the bugs, right? And then when we look at the code reviews of the way it's socialized. So it's like to say to the other members of the team that haven't got a chance to pair on it, hey, look at this change we're making so that you're aware of it. So if something does pop up, you're aware of what change and you can kind of help solve the problem.
Sure.
So
Do you have any limit on how many pair? 3, 2?
we don't put structure on that. So like we have one team, it's like 4 engineers, they pair, they
Ensemble.
yeah. So they're like on a Zoom call all day long because they're all across the country and they just, take turns like trading back and forth who's writing code. And that works really well for them. And we have some teams that it's just like we have to really watch them when each other pairing. And that's just like 2 people going back and forth. We did acquire a company, and I will tell you this, like when you acquire another company, that culture is really hard to break. And they are very anti-pairing. And we're having to like put in like almost soft hips to get them to pair. It's kind of an interesting place. I never thought of, but it's kind of interesting.
People are very opinionated about it, but I think once you've done it for a little while, it clicks. It's like, oh wow. Do you have formal roles? When we pair and when we mobbed, we would have a driver who would be typing and a navigator who would be verbalizing where to go, and then we'd rotate every 20 minutes. Do you do something like that, or is it just more informal?
So what we do is the Tuple app, I don't know if you're familiar with it, has some really great programming guides. We don't get them strict. I like to like lead through context versus like rules most of the time. So what I'll do is say, here's some really good ways of doing it. These documents will show you the way to do it. You know how to work together, or you're gonna figure out how to work together. You'll figure it out.
That's what worked for us. It emerged over time.
Right.
I'm just wondering so each of the teams has developed their own style of how they manage it. Okay, that's fair and that's wise.
That sounds like a smart thing.
Yeah.
Give them the task, let them figure out how to do it.
I brought that up at work with our lead, like, we don't seem to have any structure around that. He's like, those are training techniques to teach you how to do it, and then you work with your team to figure it out. It's like, oh yeah, when you've never worked on a well-functioning team, I guess you do need all the training techniques to do it.
I did think I heard someone about to speak. Was it you, Nick, or someone?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention, just back on the topic of web controls, just like a secondary benefit of all of this stuff. Just like the programmatic controls and automated tests, they not only are they useful, but they're communicative. They tell you about the possible states of your system. And that's something that I find working on our project, having all of these web controls available, is that at a glance, I mean, it is UI. You can also see what states your system can be put in. And that's particularly useful on a large team where people are working on things that you're not even fully aware of. And then, you see these controls pop up and you get a better understanding of what has changed and how the system has changed. So that's all.
Yeah, very true. Thanks,
I think the caveat to what Nick said is on a large system rather than a large team, because we have a large system on the team, but we're only now 10 to 14 people, but the system is large. So I totally see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Cool. I don't know, any other questions, comments? I didn't mean to cut you off. I think you were gonna say something else, but I just.
No, I don't recall.
Okay.
Cut off. So.
All right, well, if there's no other comments or concerns right now, like I said, you can always ask for the event Slack and I'll do my best to help. That's it. Thanks, everybody.
Big thanks to Casey and to Michael and Sales Rabbit for hosting this.
Thank you. There was just one thing that I would add, which was that when you're in the realm of, actually for all controls that you're designing, you need to think about the interaction, but in particular when you're designing UI controls or web controls, it's important to switch the hat on and put on the hat of the designer, the interaction designer, because now there's like an actual UI where you're implementing pages. So it can become a mess real quick if you're just looking to tack on things onto existing pages, for example. Just like for programmatic controls, if you're looking to tack on things to a programmatic control, like you're going to run into issues, but the design is going to become really convoluted. So always keep that in mind. That's how I think we manage to have so many controls, and yet, it's still manageable. It's because we're always thinking about designing those controls properly for the use cases, for how they're meant to be used.
Yes, very much so. Thank you, Antoine. Very good to know that. Cool.
Have a great night or morning, depending on what time zone you're in.
See you guys. Thanks.
Bye.